Hi, my name is Sophia. They call me Mrs. Lysander now, the woman who rebuilt herself, the philanthropist with the polished smile, the wife of a man the world calls a titan. But that's not where my story begins. Before the wealth, before the headlines, there was a girl he pulled into his gilded cage, a furious artist drowning in debt, a nobody people used and discarded, a girl who signed the wrong contract and ended up belonging to the wrong man. No one knew what he truly was to me. No one believed I'd survive him. And I never expected to fall in love with the man who controlled my every breath. So sit down. Get comfortable. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the truth. How I traded my freedom for a king. And how we somehow fell in love only after we broke each other first. This story isn't short. It couldn't be. Not with everything we survived and everything we destroyed on the way to loving each other. So I'm giving it to you in pieces. Part by part, truth by truth. And this is the second part. My chest tightened, a terrifying, hopeful ache. This was the most fragile, honest moment we had ever shared. He wasn't talking about business or the attack. He was talking about us. I kept my eyes locked on his face, afraid that if I moved, the entire fragile conversation would break. Distracted by what? I asked, the question barely a whisper, forcing him to be explicit. He didn't answer right away. He simply lifted one hand from his knee, slowly, hesitantly. For a second, just a second, I thought he was going to brush the hair from my cheek. His fingers stopped in the air between us, close enough that I could feel the residual heat of his body. I thought he was finally going to tell me everything. And worse, I wanted him to. I wanted him to tell me I was the distraction, that the vulnerability he showed me meant something real. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound was sharp, too clean, cutting through the thunder and the thick, hopeful air. Footsteps. The library door opened, revealing a dark cashmere silhouette. Lysander, darling, I simply couldn't sleep through this dreary racket. Ivana Sterling's voice sliced the moment apart, bright and synthetic. Lysander pulled his hand back instantly, the movement sharp and decisive. He was cold, neutral, distant. The mask was back on in a fraction of a second. The small, hopeful crack in the fortress slammed shut, leaving me in the suddenly cold, dusty shadow of the library. The air crackled, not just with the storm, but with the sudden, toxic intrusion of gardenia perfume. Ivana stepped into the library, her figure momentarily framed by the doorway. Then she drifted in, her eyes sweeping over the intimate arrangement of Lysander leaning forward, me leaning in, and the rain-streaked darkness around us. "Oh," she announced, her voice perfectly pitched to imply judgment without raising an octave. "Look how cozy you two are." "Just wandering, Lysander darling, hoping to find a working light." The word cozy felt like a violent insult. I felt the heat rise instantly in my cheeks, the shame and embarrassment of being caught exposed. Lysander didn't say anything, but the change in him was absolute. He straightened up, the movement fast and sharp, pulling the emotional vulnerability he'd just shown back beneath layers of cold, neutral distance. His face was a hard, impenetrable mask again, the man who had almost touched my cheek, replaced by the inaccessible billionaire. I felt so stupid. I'd actually thought that brief confession, that reaching hand, had been real. I pulled my own hands into my lap, clutching them together, trying to shrink into the shadows the lightning had left behind. Ivana stood slightly between us, a polished, beautiful wall. Her heels stopped clicking, and in the sudden quiet of the library, the only sounds were the rain and Lysander's sharp intake of breath as he readjusted his emotional armor. "Ivana?" he said, his voice flat, professional. "The generator for this wing seems to be failing. You should return to your room." She ignored the command, instead turning her victorious, sweeping smile toward me. "It was lovely seeing you, dear. Try not to worry about the archives too much in this weather. Some things, like some people, are just meant to fade away. Why does every moment pull us closer, only for something or someone to rip us apart?" He wouldn't look at me, but he looked at her. He offered her his arm, and she took it immediately. They walked away, leaving me alone with the creaking shelves and the roaring rain, the silence of the room deafening now that the hope was gone. I stayed seated, chest aching, unsure what that almost moment meant, or if it had meant anything at all. I was carrying a stack of archival notes, an excuse to look busy and important, down the narrow, dim corridor that served the older staff wings. The air back here was still and stale, smelling faintly of old wood polish. I needed to move fast, to get the notes dropped off and retreat to the quiet of my room, away from the grand, shiny parts of the house where Ivana might be lurking. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft but deliberate, cutting through the silence. "Watch that girl," Ivana's voice. I froze mid-step, my body instantly rigid against the wall. She must have been talking to a maid or a junior butler. She's not here for the right reasons. A faint trail of her gardenia perfume drifted around the corner. I could hear the other person mumble something indistinguishable, a noise of uncomfortable agreement. I didn't need to see her to know she was talking about me. My pulse hammered against the soft cartilage of my ear. Clack, clack. Her heels rounded the corner slowly. She was standing barely 10 feet away, and she saw me instantly, frozen, a deer in the shadowy headlights. The staff member, a young woman in a gray uniform, looked down at the floor, suddenly fascinated by the Persian runner. Ivana didn't flinch. Her lips curled into a slow, satisfied smile that barely moved the rest of her perfectly composed face. She looked at me, her eyes flat and cold, holding my gaze long enough for the weight of the lie, the reality of why I was here, to crush the air from my lungs. I knew she wanted me to hear. That was the worst part, how powerless it made me feel. She saw right through the fragile facade I wore. Her posture, her expensive, effortless control, screamed, "I own this house. I own him. And I see right through you." Humiliation flooded me, sharp and bitter. I clutched the notes against my chest like armor and broke the eye contact first. I spun on my heel and rushed away, my footsteps clumsy and loud compared to her elegant, deadly clicks, certain that now, something much worse than a scorned ex was coming for me. I was still shaking when I turned the corner toward the main wing, trying to pretend the stack of papers was my only concern. I was passing the grand staircase, the heart of the social theater, when my momentum died instantly. They were there. Lysander was standing slightly above Ivana on the first landing, bathed in the warm, diffused light of the massive chandelier. I only saw it for a second, but it was enough. Ivana's hand landed lightly on the sleeve of his tailored suit jacket, her perfect nails looking stark against the dark wool. She was close to him, tilting her head back, whispering something that made her lips curve into a soft, private laugh. Lysander's face was stiff, yes, uncomfortable even, but the sheer history of their closeness, the undeniable familiarity of that intimate physical touch, was the only thing that registered in my frantic brain. I didn't see him subtly try to shift away. I only saw her hand claiming him. I only saw the way her body angled toward his, a decades-long conversation I was excluded from. My heart sank, a heavy, dead weight in my chest. Maybe I was an idiot to think he could ever look at someone like me the way he looked at her. The quiet tenderness we had shared in the dark library hours earlier felt like a cheap fantasy. This was his reality, beautiful, polished, and belonging entirely to Ivana. I instinctively folded my arms across my stomach, trying to hold myself together. As Ivana leaned in again, murmuring another secret, her eyes flickered past Lysander's shoulder. She saw me. The slight, satisfied smile she gave me was fleeting, predatory, and deadly. I spun away, retreating into the shadow of a heavy velvet curtain before anyone could see the sudden, hot sting of tears forming behind my eyes. I walked away, feeling smaller and colder than ever, convinced I had just seen the undeniable truth. I was nothing but a temporary distraction from his permanent, beautiful past. I retreated all the way back to my room, locking the door and leaning against it until my pulse calmed from a frantic drum to a shaky flutter. The silence of the small room, lit only by a faint desk lamp, felt momentarily safe. I had to call Milo. I needed to hear his voice, a reminder of the only thing that truly mattered here. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my hand trembling as I dialed the number. "Hey," I whispered into the phone, keeping my voice low and soft. "I'm okay. I'm just working late. Don't worry about me." I heard his small, tired sigh on the other end, and the guilt clenched my stomach. "I promise I'll figure this out," I murmured, staring at the faint reflection of my desperate face in the dark window pane. "We are going to be fine. I won't leave you." I was hanging up, the phone still warm against my ear, when I felt a shadow fall across the floor. My head snapped up. Lysander was standing in the doorway. He hadn't knocked. The door, which I had only managed to push closed, hadn't quite latched. His figure filled the small, vulnerable space, his expression unreadable, cloaked in the dim light. "Who were you talking to?" His voice was flat, devoid of the earlier storm-induced softness, ringing with an instant cold suspicion. Panic seized my throat. I couldn't tell him. I wouldn't drag Milo, the debt, the danger into this world of cashmere coats and silent judgments. If Ivana found out I had family leverage, she'd use it. Lysander's protection extended only to me, the archivist. My heart was racing, but the lie came out immediately, perfectly smooth. No one important. The words hung in the air, a tiny, devastating betrayal. Lysander's face hardened instantly. His jaw tightened, the muscle twitching once, and his dark eyes went cold, searching mine for the truth and finding only a carefully constructed blank wall. The distance between us, which had been closing in the library, widened into a chasm. He stared at me for another second, his disappointment palpable. He didn't ask again. He didn't demand an explanation. He just gave a tiny cold shake of his head. "Right?" The word dropped like a stone, heavy with judgment and the certainty of my deceit. He turned and walked away, pulling the door shut behind him with a soft click that sounded final. I hated how easy the lie came out of my mouth, and I hated even more how fast he believed the worst of me. I collapsed back onto the mattress, realizing the gap between us had just widened, maybe permanently, and I had been the one who put the distance there. The chandelier light fractured across the room, splintering into cruel, glittering shards that bounced off every staring face. I felt the humiliation crawling up my spine like ice water, freezing everything inside me. My tongue was too thick to speak. My lungs were too tight to pull air. The walls of the dining hall, covered in centuries-old tapestries and velvet drapes, suddenly felt like they were bending inward, sealing me in with their whispers. I took a step back, one small retreat, but it felt like stumbling off a cliff. That tiny movement broke whatever fragile tether had held Lysander to his chair. He rose. Not subtly, not smoothly. The chair scraped the floor, loud and raw, the only sound in the room not coated in silk. Heads snapped toward him. The whispers fractured, some dying instantly, others hissing louder in response. He stood tall, shoulders squared, the storm raging through the windows mirrored in the fury storming behind his eyes. Ivana blinked, caught off guard for the first time all evening, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. His expression wasn't the cold, distant neutrality from the drawing room. It wasn't the defeated guilt from earlier. This was something else, something sharp, something protective, something dangerous, and it hit me like a blow to the chest. He moved. Every step he took cut through the suffocating silence, the click of expensive shoes echoing like a heartbeat in a corpse-still room. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't acknowledge the gasps. His entire focus was a straight, unbroken line pointed at me. I couldn't breathe. He reached me in seconds, his shadow swallowing mine, the warmth of him overwhelming the cold panic that had been chewing through me. "Sophia," he said, voice low, tight, meant only for me. My throat closed. My palms were numb. I didn't trust myself to speak, but I couldn't look away from him. His jaw was still rigid with fury, but under it, God, there was something gentle trembling there too. Something like regret. Something like need. His hand lifted, barely, as if to touch my arm, then faltered, suspended an inch from my sleeve. The hesitation wasn't rejection. It was restraint. He leaned in close, close enough that I felt the warmth of his breath at the edge of my ear, close enough that the entire dining hall had to crane forward to try to overhear. "Come with me," he murmured. Not an order, a plea. Before I could respond, Ivana's voice sliced cleanly through the air, brittle and bright. "Lysander." She rose to her feet, her gown whispering like a serpent against the floor. "Surely you don't intend to." He didn't even turn toward her. "If you value your own dignity," he said calmly, "do not finish that sentence." The silence was complete. No clinking glasses, no murmurs, no breath. But beneath his terrible calm, I felt something quake. Inside me, inside him, inside the entire room. He offered me his hand. Not out of etiquette, not for show. For me, and I didn't take it. I couldn't. Not with dozens of eyes stabbing into my skin. Not with my heart cracked open. Not with the fresh memory of him hesitating before standing, of watching him choose silence until the rumor had already crushed me. So I stepped back, just one step. He froze. His face barely shifted, but I saw it. The microscopic flinch, the fracture in his composure. His hand dropped slowly to his side. "Lysander," Ivana said again, softer now, coaxing, wounded. "Please, you're making a scene." His breath shuddered with contained rage. The room, the whole glittering, venomous room, held perfectly still, but my heart was no longer still. It was sprinting, frantic and terrified and hopeful and hurt all at once. I forced my voice out, rough and quiet. "I need air." I didn't wait for permission, didn't wait for him to speak. I turned and walked out of the dining hall, past the chandeliers, past the whispers, past the watching eyes, barely keeping myself from breaking into a run. Behind me, I heard Lysander inhale sharply, like someone had just plunged a knife under his ribs. He didn't follow. Not yet. And that hurt almost as much as everything else. I tore my gaze away from Lysander, the ache of his betrayal too sharp to hold. My vision was starting to blur at the edges, hot tears pricking behind my eyes, blurring the candlelight into golden smears. The murmurs swelled again, confident now that the subject of their scorn was clearly crumbling. I heard soft, clipped snickers. The guests weren't even pretending to talk about finance anymore. They were nodding and leaning into each other, exchanging pitying or predatory glances, validating the rumor with every subtle movement. Ivana looked straight at me, her head tilted back slightly. A predatory satisfaction curved into her lips. It wasn't a massive, cruel smile. It was worse. It was subtle, the quiet triumph of someone who knew exactly where the knives were hidden and how to twist them. My body felt impossibly heavy, a dead weight collapsing inward. I sank slightly, gripping the edge of my borrowed silk dress in my lap, trying to anchor myself to the earth. In that instant, everything I thought I had, every bit of fragile safety, the small flicker of trust we had built, and my own dignity, vanished. It felt like a physical expulsion from the glittering safety of the room and from Lysander's world. The fact that the rumor was damaging my already precarious position in the mansion was secondary. The primary devastation was the realization that my bond with Lysander was powerless against his environment. No one moved. Not the staff, not the guests, and not Lysander. He was still watching, paralyzed by the golden chains of his wealth and his rules. And the worst part, he didn't stop it. The silence around me felt deafening. I was entirely alone, completely exposed, defeated not by an external threat, but by the quiet, overwhelming cruelty of the world he belonged to. The isolation was a suffocating pressure, and I knew I couldn't breathe under the weight of it any longer. I was devastated, shattered, and utterly helpless. I didn't run. That would be admitting they won. Instead, I walked out of the dining hall with measured, stiff steps, propelled by a desperate, failing pride. The hallway was a blessed shift. It was quieter, the lighting dimmer, and the rich heat of the party was replaced by the cold, slightly drafty air against my skin. As soon as I cleared the door frame, my shoulders slumped, the facade of composure shattering instantly. My legs felt heavy, as if made of lead, and my knees started a weak, uncontrollable tremble. I stumbled until my back slammed against the cold marble wall, leaning against it like it was the only thing holding me upright. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, the breath catching in my throat, ragged and loud against the muffled party murmurs echoing faintly behind the thick door. Tears threatened to spill, a stinging betrayal of the desperation I felt. I swiped at my eyes with the heel of my hand, angry. I wasn't crying for the shame. I was crying because I had believed, stupidly, that I could stand next to him and be safe. I felt my entire world tilt, as if the room itself was judging me, laughing at me, and there was no one to catch me. My fingers dug hard into the sensitive skin of my arms through the thin silk of my dress, the sharp, self-inflicted pain grounding me. I was overwhelmed, reduced to a primal state of panic and despair. Ivana was in the next room, but her victory was palpable, a suffocating presence in the empty, cold hall. I was raw, broken, and leaning against stone, a mixture of despair and a burning, lonely resolve starting to form somewhere deep in my gut. I was still pressed against the cold wall, trying to regulate the frantic rhythm of my breathing, when the door to the dining hall opened slightly behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it was him. The sudden spike of tension in the quiet hallway confirmed it. Then I heard it, his voice, low and urgent, laced with that rough frustration I knew meant he was fighting his own restraints. "Sophia?" The sound of my name was a thread of warmth in the storm, a lifeline thrown across a chasm. My entire body stiffened. One part of me, the desperate, wounded part that still believed in him, wanted to pivot, throw myself into his arms, and beg him to fix the mess. But the other part, the new, terrified, angry part, stayed frozen. It was the same anger I felt when the world decided I didn't deserve an education or stability or him. He didn't move. He stayed framed in the doorway, caught between the rules of the room behind him and the raw vulnerability of the woman leaning against the wall. The faint sounds of the party, the distant clinking and chatter, seemed to amplify the distance between us. His voice called me, a thread of warmth in the storm, and yet he stayed where he was, watching instead of shielding me. He was offering a word, not a defense. I forced myself to take a stiff step away from the wall, then another, deliberately turning my back on the doorway and the man in it. My shoulders might have been shaking, but I wouldn't let him see the extent of the collapse. I wouldn't let his social cowardice witness my complete devastation. I heard his jaw clench, even without looking. He called my name a second time, a syllable of regret and restrained frustration, but the muffled footsteps of a staff member passing by were enough to keep him locked in place. He was still the billionaire, and I was still the project he hadn't saved. I chose the darkness of the hall over his uncertain light. I kept walking, the dim light of the hallway giving way to deeper shadows as I moved toward the grand staircase. Every footfall was deliberate, measured, a silent assertion that I was not running, even though my insides were screaming for escape. The cold air of the hall felt necessary now, a sharp contrast to the burning shame on my face. My breath still hitched occasionally, a shivering, helpless sound that I quickly swallowed. The truth of the situation crystallized with the brutal clarity of heartbreak. I whispered it, the sound barely audible above the faint, expensive music echoing from the dining room. This world will destroy me before I ever belong in it. It wasn't self-pity. It was a cold, hard fact, a realization that felt like the final click of a prison lock. They hadn't just humiliated me. They had stripped me of the illusion that Lysander's wealth could shield me. He was part of the architecture, not the escape route. My shoulders, which had been hunched and defeated, squared slightly. It wasn't a gesture of confidence, just a small, lonely flicker of resolve, the defiance of a creature cornered. The tears finally dried on my cheeks, leaving behind a tight, stinging mask. I was alone, and I knew it. Alone in a world that would judge, humiliate, and destroy me. And I had no choice but to keep moving forward. I let my hands fall from my tight grip on my chest to my sides, the surrender of someone who had no one to protect her. I walked into the deepening shadows, the final echo of my rigid footsteps swallowed by the vast, silent mansion. I threw myself against the heavy door of my room, slamming it shut with a force that rattled the crystal handle. The thick mahogany swallowed the noise of the party instantly, leaving behind a silence that felt more terrifying than the whispers. I didn't make it 2 steps into the room before my knees buckled. I sank to the floor, my borrowed silk dress puddling around me, my back hitting the smooth, cold plaster wall. I didn't weep, not the quiet, dignified kind. It was a raw, shaking collapse. My throat felt thick, tight, and hot, trapping the air, and my eyes burned, not just from the unshed tears, but from the sheer, scalding shame of it all. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to press them flat against the cold marble floor to steady myself. All that pride, all that desperate walking in the hallway, evaporated the second the door closed. I squeezed my eyes shut, replaying Lysander's frozen figure in the doorway, his single, useless word. I should never have come here. The thought was a venomous whisper in my own mind, a truth deeper than any rumor Ivana could invent. I should have stayed in the cold, anonymous city, where the threats were merely hunger and exhaustion, not public, cutting humiliation. I should have trusted my own solitude over his uncertain protection. I just sat there, crumpled and defeated, trying to catch a breath that felt stolen by the massive, opulent silence of the room. A small, warm pressure nudged my arm, right where my fingers were digging into my silk-covered skin. Milo. I opened my eyes, the shame temporarily pushed aside by the sight of him. He was standing over me, his golden fur warm against the cold marble floor, his low, rhythmic whine vibrating through the air. It wasn't his usual happy, demanding sound. It was an anxious, drawn-out noise, soft but deep in his chest. He rested his heavy muzzle on my knee, then gave a sharp, wet nudge to my forearm, almost pushing my hand away from where it was digging into myself. His big, dark eyes, always so expressive, were fixed on my face. They weren't just looking for food or affection. They were wide, reflecting the faint chandelier light above, searching my expression. His warm fur, usually a comfort, felt like a heavy weight, a soft anchor in the spiraling panic. I could hear his breathing now, too, heavy and fast, mirroring the frantic rhythm of my own heart. He knew. The animal sensed the sudden, seismic shift in the emotional landscape before I could even name it. He knew something was fundamentally wrong here, in the cold, opulent silence. I dropped my head, resting my cheek against his soft, heavy shoulder, letting the small sounds of his anxiety mingle with my own choked breaths. He was the only thing grounding me. Just as I was sinking further into the brief comfort of Milo's warm fur, the low, steady buzz, buzz, buzz started on the bedside table. My phone. It wasn't a single text. It was a constant, vicious stream of notifications, turning the polished wood surface into a vibrating, tiny enemy. I reluctantly pulled away from Milo, shoving myself upright. The glow of the screen was blinding. I snatched the phone, my breath hitching again as I saw the barrage. Screenshots of Ivana's group in the dining hall, magnified and pixelated. Blurred images of me, alone near the entrance. Snippets of furious text chains copied from someone else's phone, accompanied by whispering commentary on the main feed. Did you see what happened? She seduced him. She has a secret child. It was the echo of the dining hall, amplified and digitized, chasing me into the supposed safety of my room. They weren't just judging me in person, they were immortalizing the humiliation. The whispers that had rippled through the polished tables were now circulating, screenshots proving that the social assassination was successful and spreading. I wanted silence, desperately. Technology wouldn't give it. The shame burned hotter than ever, turning my heartbreak into a sharp, focused anger, directed not just at Ivana, but at the world that loved to see a trespasser put in her place. I slammed the phone face down on the table, silencing the buzz, but the images were already branded behind my eyelids. I stared at the silenced phone, leaning my head back against the cool wall, the last remnants of anger leaching out, leaving behind a profound emptiness. Then I noticed the silence. It was too complete. The dining hall was directly across the grand foyer, but the faint murmurs of the party, the clinking glasses, the distant, expensive music, had vanished. Gone, too, was the low, persistent hum of the mansion itself, the quiet footfalls of the night staff, the distant hiss of the sophisticated ventilation system, the barely audible electronic pulse of a dozen security checkpoints. The house wasn't sleeping. It was dead quiet, like a machine that had been paused. The air, which had been simply cold from the draft in the hall, now felt colder inside the room, heavier, pressing down on my eardrums. I pushed myself off the floor, my muscles stiff, and stood listening. I rotated slowly, scanning the room. Everything was the same, the velvet chairs, the antique wardrobe, but the atmosphere was different, hostile. I strained to hear anything through the heavy door. Nothing. Only a very faint, almost subsonic vibration, a low-frequency rumble that seemed to be coming not from the walls, but through the walls. It was the sound of a vast, silent fortress, suddenly alerted, suddenly watching. I took a few slow steps toward the door, my bare feet silent on the thick rug, Milo padding anxiously behind me. I listened, my lungs refusing to take a full breath. The silence was absolute. Then I saw it, a piece of paper, thick and white, appearing with impossible quietness beneath the narrow gap at the bottom of the heavy mahogany door. It slid out from the hallway, smoothly, deliberately, as if propelled by a ghost. It stopped perfectly centered, just inside my room. My heart made a single hard jump against my ribs. I walked the last few steps, dropping to one knee beside the paper, the cold air from the hall rushing over my hand. I picked it up. It was heavy bond paper, folded once. Inside, the message was written in block capitals, clean and stark, with no identifying marks or signatures. You shouldn't be here. It wasn't a threat of violence. It was worse. It was a cold statement of fact, a declaration that my presence was an error, seen and judged by some unseen power. It wasn't a question of if someone was watching, but how closely. The humiliation I just endured felt like parlor games compared to the chill spreading through my blood now. The shame instantly converted into the sharp, terrifying adrenaline of pure fear. Someone didn't just want me gone. Someone had invaded this safe space to deliver their verdict. The paper was still clutched in my hand, the coldness of the ink seeping into my palm, when the light flickered. It wasn't the main chandelier, which was stable, but the small accent light mounted above the portrait nearest the door. It made a brief, buzzing sound, a harsh electronic crackle, and then went dark. I froze, staring at the sudden loss of light. It was insignificant, maybe a faulty bulb, but in the overwhelming silence of the mansion, it felt deliberate. I looked up, instinctively locating the small, recessed security camera lens mounted discreetly in the corner molding above the door. It was nearly invisible light, but I knew it was there, a silent eye meant to watch the hallway. As I watched, the little red LED indicator light on the camera, a tiny, assuring pinprick of status, began to pulse erratically. It flashed, on, static, off. It stuttered like a dying heartbeat before going completely dark. I heard the high-pitched ping of the camera system failing, a sound so small it was almost swallowed by the huge room, but it snapped my attention taut. The house didn't just feel hostile now, it felt damaged. Someone hadn't just watched me, they had blinded the watchers. Nothing here felt accidental anymore. My chest was tight, fear pulling the threads of my breath shallow and fast. I stayed crouched by the door, the note crumpled in my hand, staring at the dead camera. I didn't dare move to turn on the bathroom light or even fully stand. Then I heard something. It was faint, just outside the thick door, muffled by the carpet in the hallway. A soft thump. Not heavy, but rhythmic, almost like a dragging sound. I held my breath, straining my ears. The sound stopped. The silence resumed, but now it was layered with the anticipation of noise. My gaze dropped to the floor, fixating on the thin line of darkness under the door. I saw it, a shadow. Not sharp and defined, but a deep, moving smudge of black that slid into the gap from the right. It stopped directly in front of my door, hovering there for a heartbeat. I imagined a body, tall and still, waiting. I wasn't imagining it. The sound resumed, almost a soft shift on the carpet, followed by the faintest of human sounds, a short, exhaled sigh that might have been the cloth of a coat rubbing against the wall, or someone swallowing a nervous breath. My heart hammered against the floor, against my ribs. It was real. Someone was out there, on the other side of this heavy barrier, and the cameras weren't watching them. The shadow under the door jerked away. Fast, silent. The subtle breathing sound was instantly cut off. I stayed locked in my crouch, heart punching against the floor, adrenaline turning my fear into a metallic taste in my mouth. Was it gone? Did it hear me? The air near the floor, where the chill draft flowed, suddenly shifted, signaling someone had moved away from the door. Then the heavy brass handle above me began to turn. Slowly, deliberately, clicking against the mechanism, I let out a soundless gasp, scrambling backward, clutching the note. Milo, sensing the shift, let out a deep, chesty growl, a rumble that quickly escalated into a low, protective bark aimed at the door. The door swung inward. It wasn't the shadowy threat. It was Lysander. He filled the frame, not looking like the cold, composed billionaire from the dining hall. His dark suit was slightly rumpled, his hair looked disheveled, and his eyes were wide, sweeping the room fast. He wasn't arrogant or in control. He was scared, and he was breathing heavily, as if he had run the entire length of the hallway. He didn't speak. His eyes found me first, crouched on the floor, then darted to the dead security camera above, and back to me. He crossed the space in 2 long strides and put both his hands on my shoulders, his grip hard and anchoring. Too close, too fast. His body heat radiated through the silk of my dress. He didn't seem to care about the distance, only the presence. "What did you see?" he grated out, his voice a low, rough texture, his breath hot against my hairline. Did someone come to your room?" His voice wasn't just rough. It cracked with an intensity I hadn't heard since the night I'd met him. He didn't wait for my answer. He took his hands from my shoulders, pivoting to check the dead camera again, then sweeping his gaze to the tall, shadowed windows. A shadow, I managed, my voice a dry whisper. I held out the crumpled note. And this, it slid under the door. He took it from me, unfolding the paper with surgical precision, his eyes scanning the simple, damning message. His jaw hardened, the muscles jumping beneath his tanned skin. He dropped the note, not bothering to flatten it, and it drifted to the thick rug like something diseased. He didn't make an excuse. He didn't try to minimize the threat with a practiced, arrogant sweep of his hand, or tell me it was just a prank. This was new. This was him admitting vulnerability. He turned back to me, the color drained from his face, leaving the sharp, beautiful angles of his bones exposed. His eyes met mine, not with desire, not with the cold control he usually wore like armor, but with raw, unadulterated fear. "I need you to listen to me," he said, the words strained. He reached for my hand, pulling me up swiftly until I was standing, balanced precariously on the balls of my feet near his chest. His proximity was sudden, overwhelming, and utterly necessary. His gaze locked on mine, deep and dark and terrified. "You're not safe alone." His admission was a physical blow, a confirmation of the lurking darkness I'd only just glimpsed. "You're not safe alone." It wasn't about the dinner party anymore. It wasn't about my past or his family's approval. This was a deeper, colder threat that even his wealth and walls couldn't neutralize. My hands, which had been shaking with residual shame, now shook with a sharp, clear fear. But beneath the fear, a desperate, reluctant strand of trust caught hold. He hadn't left me. He came. He admitted the danger. "Then what are you going to do?" I asked, the desperation of the question barely masked by a fierce whisper. Lysander didn't answer with words. He reached out and gently nudged me toward the open door, his body blocking the entrance as he scanned the room one last time. Milo, sensing the shift from internal panic to external action, stopped barking and began to whine, pressing close to my legs. "We move," Lysander commanded, his voice low, his breathing still too fast. I stepped out into the hallway with him, pulling my silk gown closer, the air here far colder than inside the room. It was dark now, the lighting sparse and geometric. The silence was louder than ever. The faint, nervous hum of the house was entirely gone. We stood shoulder to shoulder, both scanning the vast, silent corridor. Everything looked perfectly preserved, perfectly opulent, except for the absolute knowledge that the security systems were off and someone had just been standing here, waiting. I felt him tense beside me. My eyes followed his gaze, tracing the polished expanse of the hallway down to the turn where it led to the central stairs. At the very edge of the shadow, a tall, carved oak door to what must have been a study or parlor was slowly, almost lazily swinging shut. It hadn't been closed by hand. It looked like a movement in a draft, except there was no draft. We didn't see who or what had been standing there. We only saw the final heavy thud as the wood met the jamb, sealing off the secret. He gripped my wrist, not with tenderness, but with the raw, anchoring force of a drowning man, and pulled me in the opposite direction from where the dark hallway was swallowing our fear. We didn't head back to the main party or the grand foyer. We plunged deeper into the house, down a narrow, undecorated servant staircase that smelled of ozone and industrial cleaner, until he shouldered open a heavy steel door marked with a simple black geometric symbol. He hauled me across the threshold and released me, spinning to face the room. It was the security control center, a sudden, brutal contrast to the Baroque hallway. It was colder here, the air thick with the metallic scent of heated electronics. The walls were lined with banks of humming servers, and the only light came from the glowing monitors stacked floor to ceiling, casting an eerie, blue-green wash over Lysander's pale face. The room wasn't quiet. It pulsed with the low, frantic buzz of 1,000 tiny failures. Blinking red lights flickered across the equipment racks, and the only sound was the white noise static of the video feeds, a continuous, low-level hiss. Each screen was a glowing, silent eye watching a different part of the mansion, but now they all seemed to be weeping light, displaying a truth that was broken and distorted. I could see the rigid line of Lysander's back. He wasn't looking at the chaos of the party anymore. He was looking at the silent, organized chaos of his defenses failing. My earlier humiliation felt small now, buried beneath the sudden clinical dread of this room. This wasn't about a rumor. This was real. Lysander was already moving, his fingers flying across a touchscreen console near the center of the room. He was a master conductor trying to restart an orchestra that had just burst into flames. I moved closer to the wall of monitors. The sheer number of feeds was disorienting. Hundreds of silent, high-definition views of empty hallways and sleeping gardens. but a few were flashing angry red. On one screen, the image was tearing, displaying a scrambled, pixelated block where the main foyer should be. On another, the picture was fine, but the timestamp at the bottom right corner was flickering violently. 11:45 p.m., 11:40 p.m., 11:12 p.m. It stuttered wildly, unable to decide what now was. I stopped breathing when I saw the third feed. It showed the hallway outside my bedroom door, the one Lysander had just burst through. The image was crystal clear, but the timestamp was frozen solid at 10:58 p.m., nearly an hour ago. On that frozen feed, I could see two things. The door was closed, and a maintenance cart was parked outside. Then, abruptly, the image reversed. It snapped backward, skipping frames, rewinding time on its own, showing a servant pushing the cart further and further away. It wasn't just a glitch. Someone wasn't just in the system. Someone was inside, methodically erasing their history, manipulating what was real and what was recorded. My earlier fear of a simple intruder curdled into a heavy, sinking dread. This wasn't some jealous woman or petty thief. This was planned. This was personal, and it was engineered. Lysander wasn't looking at the compromised feeds. He was focused on the control panel built into the central console. His fingers hammered the glass, pulling up complex schematic views of the house, floor plans overlaid with blinking red and yellow dots, indicating system status. I drifted to the nearest panel, a secondary control station, trying to follow the lines of panic. I saw the map of the Eastern Wing, the large, mostly locked wing where his family's archives were kept. Every magnetic lock, every laser grid was marked with a tiny, blinking red D. Disabled. Not failed, but manually switched off. My eyes scanned lower to the physical control interface. The panel controlling the main perimeter alarms, thick metal buttons shielded by plastic covers, was cracked. Not shattered by brute force, but carefully split along the seam, as if someone had used a thin, precise tool to override the internal wiring. I looked at a different screen, this one displaying the external view of the grounds. The camera feeds were static, but the digital map showed massive, gaping black gaps in the coverage. These weren't random outages. They formed a clear, shadowed path from the dense woods surrounding the property directly toward the back service entrance. Every sensor along that path was offline. My breath hitched. My mind finally put the pieces together. The paper under the door, the dead camera, the rewinding footage, and now these physical clues of planned sabotage. This wasn't just a break-in. This was infiltration. I turned to Lysander, who was still trying to reboot the main server, his shoulders rigid. I didn't need him to tell me. This was done deliberately. I watched Lysander work the console, pulling up firewalls and access logs. He moved with the desperate speed of someone trying to stop a leak with a Band-Aid. His focus wasn't on the screens that showed the chaos, the glitches, the rewinding, the black gaps in the coverage. He was looking at something deeper, a hidden layer I couldn't access. When the communications line crackled with a voice asking for an update, Lysander spun away from the main monitors, putting his back to the wall of screens that showed the house map. He didn't speak to the guards near him. He spoke into a wrist comm, his voice a low, clipped murmur that made his jaw twitch. I caught only fragmented words. System 1 offline. Perimeter breach is confirmed. It was the sudden shift in his body language that hit me. He was deliberately shielding the monitor, leaning into the conversation to prevent me from hearing the details. I felt the sharp, cold edge of mistrust cut through my fear. He hadn't just reacted to the danger. He was navigating a danger he already knew. My internal monologue was a quick, furious flash. He knew this was coming. He knew this house was a target, and he brought me here anyway. I wanted honesty more than I wanted his protection. His need to control the information, right here, right now, was a betrayal that felt strangely worse than the vulnerability of the house itself. I stared at the rigid line of his spine, and the silence between his hushed words was loaded with the thing he was hiding. This wasn't an emergency. This was an ongoing war. Lysander ended the urgent call and finally turned, his eyes searching mine. The blue-green glow of the screens behind him made him look spectral, alien. I opened my mouth, the question about his preparation for this war burning on my tongue, but the moment was violently severed. The heavy steel door we had just entered through slammed inward, hitting the wall with a deafening crash that swallowed the electronic hum. A guard, dressed in the crisp, dark uniform of the estate's private security, stumbled into the room. He was tall, but his posture was hunched over, his chest heaving. He ignored me completely, his eyes locked onto Lysander. His voice was not shaky, but delivered with the chilling clarity of professional panic. "Sir, private wing, level 3. Motion sensors triggered. We have a non-registered ID. No access card or biometric match. Someone is in the archive." The weight of the silence that followed was absolute. It choked the static, killed the faint humming of the servers. Lysander's face didn't move, but the blood had left it entirely. The truth, finally confirmed by an outside source, felt harder than any fear I had imagined. This was not a mistake. This was not the jealous ex-fiancé or a disgruntled employee. The danger was cold, calculated, and already inside the most fortified place in the house, targeting the most protected secrets. The command came out of Lysander before the guard could even draw a breath. 2 teams to level 3, immediate lockdown of the corridor access. We move now. He grabbed my arm again, his grip tight, not gentle. It was the movement of a man who suddenly didn't have time for elegance or explanation. We left the control room, leaving the guard scrambling for his comms, the metal door swinging heavily shut behind us. The atmosphere changed instantly. The back corridors were a skeleton beneath the beautiful facade of the main house. They were narrower, the ceilings lower, the wallpaper plain and institutional gray. Shadows stretched long and grotesque under the widely spaced service lights, turning our fast-moving figures into distorted, silent ghosts. Every footfall echoed on the linoleum floor, a loud, undeniable beat in the dead silence. I didn't look at Lysander. My eyes were on the floor ahead of us. The stone near a ventilation unit was wet, smeared with something dark that caught the harsh light. It was mud. Fresh, sticky, black earth that had been tracked in. A trail of small, hurried footprints led in the direction Lysander was pulling me, deeper into the maze of the eastern wing. I wasn't just following him anymore. I was following the physical evidence of the person who had written that cold note. The mud wasn't the only thing. We rounded a sharp, institutional corner, and the light flickered overhead, casting the scene in momentary darkness before buzzing back to life. In that brief blackness, I felt Lysander pull me tighter, his fingers digging into the soft skin of my inner arm. When the light returned, I saw it. A thin, dark line of wetness streaked across the floor, where the mud had been wiped, but not completely cleaned. It led straight to a door set slightly ajar. A thick, heavy service door painted the same utilitarian gray as the walls. This door was usually sealed. Near the base of the door, where the hinges met the molding, a single, violent scratch marred the paint, deep and jagged, as if a metal tool had slipped hard against the frame. Further up, a small, fist-sized piece of the vinyl wallpaper had been roughly torn away, revealing the plaster beneath. It looked like someone had grabbed at the wall in a rush, desperate for purchase. My focus sharpened. Fear was still a tight knot in my chest, but it was dissolving into a cold, almost clinical curiosity. These weren't subtle electronic clues anymore. These were crude, physical signs of forced entry and haste. The image of the shadowy figure from my bedroom door was suddenly made real, tangible, and messy. My suspicion of Lysander momentarily receded, replaced by the acute, primal sense that the person who left these marks was still nearby. I was so focused on the shredded wallpaper that I took a step toward the slightly ajar door, needing to see inside, needing to solidify the reality of the threat. Before my bare foot touched the threshold, Lysander's grip tightened painfully on my arm, arresting my movement. He didn't shout. That would draw attention. Instead, he hissed the words, his face close to my ear, his breath hot and smelling faintly of champagne. "Don't move. You will wait here." It wasn't a request. It was an order, delivered with the raw authority of panic. He let go of my arm, the sudden absence of his touch almost as jarring as the suddenness of his presence, and reached toward his inner jacket pocket. I stood there, breathing shallowly, watching the desperation contort his aristocratic features. He was trying to push me back into the role of the passive victim, the girl who only needed his protection. And for the first time since the humiliation in the dining hall, my fear of the external threat was overshadowed by a sharper, immediate distrust of him. Wait here? in the path of the mud and the torn wallpaper. I looked at the furious, cold glare in his eyes, the same gaze he wore when he was closing a deal or controlling a narrative. And I realized this wasn't about my safety first. It was about his control. It was the first time I wondered if the threat he was reacting to was one he'd created or one he was merely fighting to keep hidden. He wanted me safe, yes, but more, he wanted me obedient. "What are you doing?" I whispered, the sound low and fierce. My heart hammered against my ribs, but it was beating with challenge now, not just fear. "Tell me what you are hiding, Lysander." He didn't answer my question. He just glared, then pulled a small silver item from his pocket, a key card maybe, or a remote, and pressed a button. A faint thunk echoed down the narrow corridor, the sound of a heavy door sealing somewhere deeper inside the wing. He was locking down sections, choosing what to sacrifice to buy time. Lysander didn't spare me another glance. He focused on the slightly ajar service door ahead. He moved toward it, his hand reaching for the knob. But I was already looking past the threshold, following the line of the mud smears, and my gaze landed on the doorframe itself. The latch plate, a solid piece of thick metal screwed into the jamb, was visibly bent outward, not just unlocked, but violently stressed. The wood around the bolt hole wasn't splintered from the inside, as if someone had tried to kick it open in a rush. It was damaged from the outside. Tiny, precise indentations marked the wood, suggesting a tool had been carefully inserted and used as a lever, prying the heavy door outward just enough to force the bolt free. This wasn't brute force sabotage. This wasn't someone who had compromised the systems from a distance. This was an expert, standing outside Lysander's supposed impenetrable wall, with time and professional equipment, forcing a physical entry. The coldness in my heart deepened, shifting from dread to a terrible certainty. This person was methodical. They were prepared. And suddenly, the whole Ivana narrative, the rumors, the threats, the emotional drama, felt like a flimsy curtain pulled over something vast and terrifying. This wasn't about love or revenge. This was business. This was calculated. Lysander yanked the handle of the service door open, not bothering with caution, and plunged into the darkened corridor beyond. The motion of the door made the dim light bulb overhead swing slightly, and the shadow of the jamb slid across the bent metal of the latch plate. I didn't wait. I stepped into the damaged doorway, the damp, chilled air of the inner, locked wing hitting my face. The contrast was immediate. This section of the house wasn't just closed. It felt dead, vacuum-sealed and forgotten. My eyes followed Lysander's receding back as he moved fast, blending into the deeper shadows. He was out of sight in seconds, his frantic speed a testament to how high the stakes really were. I stood in the doorway, my spine pressed against the splintered wood of the frame, and let the truth sink into the marrow of my bones. This house, which meant to be the ultimate fortress, the place where Lysander kept his power and his family secrets, had been breached. Not by bad luck or a desperate fool, but by someone who knew exactly where the teeth of the mansion were and how to pull them out, one by one. The person who got in wasn't trying to scare me. They weren't trying to humiliate Lysander. They were here for something valuable, something specific, and they didn't care who they had to go through. And the man I was falling for, the one who promised me safety, was not only unable to stop this ghost, but had been hiding the very existence of the kind of enemy capable of this. My breath caught, not because of the intruder, but because of the sharp, icy realization. He can't protect me, and I don't trust him to be honest about who is trying to destroy us. The enemy wasn't Ivana. It was something far colder, far more real, and it was already walking in the dark heart of the man I loved. I didn't realize how loud the music was until I walked through the towering glass doors of the conservatory, and it stopped being music. The air was heavy with the heat of 100 bodies, the overripe scent of white lilies, and expensive, mingling perfumes. I stood just inside, feeling the weight of my bare shoulders, the simple silk dress a flimsy shield, and then I saw her. Ivana stood near a fountain draped with orchids, a creature of stark, platinum perfection in a ruby dress that commanded the light. Her head tilted, framed by the lush, predatory greenery, and her eyes, glittering and sharp, locked onto me like a thermal scope sighting prey. The music pulsed, but the melody had dissolved into a suspenseful thrum, a low, rhythmic beat that felt like a pulse before a jump scare. Every conversation I could hear immediately tightened, becoming a sudden, hostile murmur. My old instinct, the one buried by weeks of fighting for Lysander's attention, was to turn, retreat, let the gilded room swallow my cowardice. But the coldness from the utility corridor was still in my veins, the knowledge that I'd been fighting the wrong kind of enemy. I held her gaze, my jaw set so tight it ached, and took one slow, deliberate step forward. This time, I wouldn't run. This was my garden, too. Ivana didn't move toward me. She didn't need to. She just shifted her weight, allowing her small, perfectly manicured circle of acquaintances to engulf her, and then she began to talk. Her voice didn't rise above the din, but it was amplified by the sudden, expectant silence of the room. "Honestly, I'm just relieved Lysander finally let the charity case out of the staff quarters," she said, her tone a brittle, public service announcement. A wave of laughter, sharp, quick, and devoid of humor, sliced through the air. My stomach clenched. It was the same feeling from the first time she had cornered me. That nauseating combination of fear and public exposure. I could see the guests around her exchange glances, followed by rapid, judgmental eye movements that swept over my dress, my hair, the fact that I was here alone. I mean, is she even registered to be at a private event on this wing? A blonde woman next to Ivana asked the question loud enough for the fountain to echo it. Security is so tight now, you wouldn't think they'd let just anyone wander in. The words weren't a direct attack, but the implication was the weapon. Intruder. Unworthy. Unregistered. It was an echo of the report from the security room, twisting the external threat into a social one, and it was pointed directly at me. My cheeks burned, but I felt my feet stay rooted to the polished stone floor. The shame was there, heavy and metallic, but this time it failed to paralyze me. I was done being frozen. I gripped the glass of lukewarm champagne in my hand, the ice-cold memory of Lysander's betrayal fueling a sudden, brittle defiance. Ivana smiled then, a slow, pitying curl of her lip that always felt rehearsed for an audience. "It's just so sad when the ones you try to help turn out to be so utterly mercenary," she cooed, tilting her head back to address the silent, beautiful crowd surrounding her. I hear she was desperate, claimed to be a struggling artist. Then suddenly, she's in Lysander's bed, trying to secure a contract that gives her a stake in his whole legacy. The whispers started immediately, not hushed, but deliberately loud. Mercenary. Contract. The sound of clinking champagne glasses faded, replaced by the collective, sharp inhale of judgment. Two men nearby pulled out their phones, not to text, but to openly scroll through news feeds, confirming the rumors that had circulated since I arrived. "He's vulnerable, you see," Ivana continued, her voice gaining speed, spinning the narrative like poison ivy. "The archives, the family trust, she's dangerous because she's convinced him she's a victim, but she's just a common trickster after the signature." A woman in a sequined gown let out a small, cutting laugh. I saw the flash of phone screens pointing my way, discreetly but undeniably. They weren't just gossiping, they were documenting the humiliation. The cold shame I had felt earlier twisted into a hot, furious wave of clarity. This wasn't just idle spite, the jealousy of an ex. This was an organized public assassination of my character, designed to make me look like the external threat to the house, while the real danger was stalking the back corridors. Ivana wasn't trying to win Lysander back. She was trying to destroy my credibility so completely that no one would believe me when the truth came out. My hand tightened on the champagne glass, not breaking it, but enough to make my knuckles white. Ivana paused, sensing the room's attention had peaked, and prepared her next shot. I cut her off. My voice was pitched low, vibrating with a tightly controlled intensity that was colder than my fear, owned by the fury that Lysander's lack of honesty had gifted me. "You really think I walked past an actual professional break-in just now to worry about your tired script?" I didn't wait for her to process the intrusion of reality into her social theater. "I know this isn't jealousy. This is performance. And frankly, your performance is getting stale." The blood drained from Ivana's cheeks. The confidence that usually armored her flickered. The crowd around her sensed the change in temperature. The shift from rehearsed social catfight to something dangerous. They didn't know what I was talking about, but they knew the rules had changed. I took one step closer, planting my bare feet firmly on the marble. "Find a new hobby, Ivana. Something creative. Something that doesn't involve obsessing over what I signed, what I wore, or which dusty corner of this mansion I crawled out of. You look desperate, and desperation is beneath you. My fear was fully replaced by a savage defiance. It wasn't the polished comeback I wished for, but it was honest, raw, and it left a visible scratch on her beautiful facade. For a long, silent beat, she only stared, her mouth slightly open, the laughter of the onlookers dying in their throats. The silence felt heavy, a tangible space where my insult hung in the expensive air, refusing to be absorbed by the gossip. The shock registered on Ivana's face. Not the shock of being insulted, but the shock of a perfectly orchestrated moment suddenly breaking tempo. Her ruby lips parted, but before a retort could form, my gaze snagged on a figure across the room, near the far corner of the glass wall. He wasn't part of the chattering elite. He was too still, too professional, dressed in a dark suit that made him fade against the background of the dark granite wall. Most guests held phones clumsily, or used them to scroll. This man held a device horizontally, low and steady, his elbow braced against his ribcage. The tiny, focused glare of a recording light confirmed it. He was filming. I'd seen enough paparazzi stakeouts on the periphery of this world to know the difference between a random bored guest taking a snapshot and a professional assigned to capture content. This man was waiting, positioned for the perfect angle, and he hadn't moved an inch since the tension spiked. I looked back at Ivana. Her eyes were still wide from my verbal attack, but as her gaze followed mine to the corner of the room, her expression shifted. It wasn't just hatred or spite now. It was awareness. She knew that camera was there. She was playing to it. This wasn't a spontaneous social lynching. It was orchestrated harassment for public consumption. The memory of the calculated force entry on the archives wing snapped into place. Strategy. This wasn't bullying. This was the opening salvo in a much larger, much more organized attack. I felt the last lingering threads of my fear of her completely dissolve, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged suspicion of something far more complex. Ivana caught the shift in my focus, saw my eyes flick back to the man with the steady camera, and for a split second, she looked hunted. She tried to recover, tossing her platinum hair and turning to sip her drink, but the damage was done. The crowd was still holding its breath, waiting for the blood sport to continue, but the main players had locked eyes on something unseen. She finally broke the stare, the false sweetness returning to her voice, too bright and hollow. "Well, darling, since you're so worried about unregistered guests." Before she could finish the line, I took the step toward her, closing the distance between us until only the fountain separated our silk and our fury. She flinched, a small, involuntary movement, and I knew I had the momentum. I didn't let her escape back into the crowd's adoration. I moved past the ring of silent, judgmental faces and pushed open the heavy glass door leading to the terrace. The air was a shock of cold, wet wind after the cloying heat of the conservatory. The night was black and endless, the city lights far below sparkling like scattered diamonds on black velvet. The sound of the party, the music, the whispers, the clinking, was immediately muffled, trapped behind the thick glass. We were alone, standing at the high, clear glass railing, our breath misting like white smoke in the isolating cold. The masks were dropping, one by one. This was not a social attack anymore. This was a private confrontation, dangerous and sharp. Ivana pulled her ruby shawl tightly around her shoulders, the cold air making her shiver despite her rage. She didn't look at the city view. She looked at the glass door, calculating her retreat. "You've won, Sophia," she spat, her voice tight with forced calm. "You get the house, the name, the contract. You get to play the victim. Enjoy the emptiness." I leaned against the glass railing, allowing the biting wind to whip my hair around my face. "I don't think I've won anything, and I don't think you're fighting me for Lysander anymore." My eyes drilled into hers, forcing her to hold the look. "I think you're scared of someone else. You're playing to the camera because you were told to." The careful composure she'd spent years perfecting shattered. Her eyes went wide, the pupils expanding slightly in the sudden realization that I saw the puppet strings. Her face, usually so controlled, was raw with panic. She took an involuntary half-step back, hitting the railing. "That's absurd," she whispered, her voice cracking against the wind. I watched her body language, the rapid, shallow breaths she took. The fear was undeniable. It tasted nothing like the spoiled jealousy she usually radiated. This was primal. I pushed, low and quiet. The security systems are compromised. Someone just broke into the private archive wing. You think I'm going to stand there and listen to your script about my reputation when this whole house is under attack? She bit back a response, tears blurring the edges of her eyes, her confidence dissolving into sheer, unedited terror. Her shoulders slumped. Then, in a rush of air that was half a sob, she delivered the line, the single, devastating sentence that wasn't meant for my ears, only for her own release. You think I'm doing this alone? I stared at her, absorbing the line, letting the implications settle like ice water in my bones. You think I'm doing this alone? The fury, the defiance, the residual shame, it all collapsed, replaced by a terrible, clear-eyed focus. She was telling the truth. Who? I asked, my voice barely audible over the rush of the wind past the railing. I didn't frame it as a question. It was a demand, clipped and desperate. Who told you about the archives? Who gave you the timeline? You don't have the contacts for this kind of sabotage, Ivana. You just have the motive. She pressed her spine hard against the cool glass, wrapping her arms around her midsection, shaking her head. No, I won't. I stepped closer, invading her space, giving her nowhere to look but at my face. You already admitted it. Now, tell me who is pulling your strings. You're losing, and you're about to be exposed. Who is the one who knew exactly what information to feed the press? Who told you to stand there and make a scene for that camera? Who is using your jealousy as a smokescreen? The desperation on her face intensified. She looked wildly from the cold city lights to my unwavering stare. She had been the queen of this social chessboard, but now she was a cornered pawn, terrified of the hand that moved her. Someone warned me, she finally choked out, the words ripped from her like a cough. Tip me off about you. They hate Lysander more than I do. They gave me the details, the proof you were a threat. She closed her eyes, shuddering. When she opened them, the raw venom was back, directed not at me, but at the name that had betrayed her, that had forced her into this vulnerable corner. Adrian, she whispered, the name a thin, toxic exhale that vanished instantly on the cold wind. It was Adrian. The silence that followed the name Adrian was vast, broken only by the thin, high whistle of the wind against the building's corner. It wasn't the kind of silence that invited drama. It was the sharp, empty sound of a puzzle piece finally clicking into a terrifying place. Adrian. Lysander's estranged, deeply resentful cousin. The fury I had been feeding, the anger at Ivana, at the humiliation, at the sheer spiteful injustice, drained out of me, leaving behind a cold, analytical dread. The red veil of emotional conflict lifted, and suddenly, I wasn't facing a rival in a love triangle. I was standing next to a frightened accomplice in a calculated act of sabotage. I looked at Ivana's distraught face, her ruby dress against the monochrome night, and I saw a victim of manipulation, not the mastermind. The true threat wasn't her shallow cruelty. It was the unseen hand that had exploited it. My fear of social ruin had been a distraction. My focus shifted instantly from the personal, messy fight to the objective, lethal strategy. Adrian. He wasn't just lurking in the shadows, he was moving the chess pieces, using Ivana's petty jealousies to serve his own, much larger purpose. It was a complete reversal. She was the one who was meant to take the fall. Ivana didn't wait for me to respond. She didn't look at me again. She simply pivoted, pulling the glass door open with a sharp clack that let the music rush out and swallow her in the crowd again. She was gone, retreating back into the safety of the visible threat, abandoning the dangerous truth she just revealed. I stayed on the balcony, leaning my forehead against the chilled glass of the railing, watching the shimmering, distant lights of the city. My breath formed small, frantic clouds that dissolved instantly in the vast cold. I was no longer afraid of Ivana's whispers, her petty warfare. She was just a loose wire, easily short-circuited. The real enemy was systemic, calculated, and targeting not just my reputation, but Lysander's legacy. Adrian. If Adrian was using Ivana's hatred to create a public scandal, and if someone, perhaps Adrian himself, was simultaneously breaching the house security to access the archives, then this wasn't about a failed engagement. This was a professional hit on the entire empire. He had orchestrated the drama for the camera, making Ivana believe she was the star, when she was merely the distraction. A cold, heavy certainty settled over me. Adrian wasn't playing games, he was moving pieces, and he was moving fast. The fear was different now. Not the sinking panic of being caught in a trap, but the sharp adrenaline of realizing the entire chessboard was about to be overturned. The question was stark, and it was the only thing that mattered in the brutal cold. If Adrian was involved, what did he need to steal, and what was he willing to burn down to get it? The heavy mahogany door to Lysander's office clicked shut behind me with a sound of profound finality. It was a rich, warm space. Low, recessed lighting, leather, dark walnut, but it felt less like a workspace and more like a high-end prison cell built for one. Lysander was standing near his massive empty desk, perfectly still. He hadn't moved to greet me, hadn't offered a seat. He simply watched me cross the Persian rug toward him. His calm was unnerving. He wasn't breathing hard, didn't look like a man whose security systems had just been breached and whose intended fiancée had just been publicly humiliated. He looked controlled, the expensive, custom-tailored jacket a pristine shield against emotion. I stopped a few feet away, my spine rigid from the cold, analytical dread that had replaced my anger on the balcony. I waited for the yelling, for the demand to know what I'd done. Instead, he simply rested one hand on the edge of his desk, his expression unreadable, and I knew what was coming. He wasn't about to yell, he was about to lecture. He was about to tell me what I was permitted to do, using the cold voice of the billionaire, not the warm voice of the lover. The tension between us was a live current, silently sizzling, waiting for the first wrong word to create a fire. He finally moved, crossing the distance in quick, economical strides, stopping close enough that I could feel the residual heat radiating from his body, despite the balcony cold still clinging to my silk dress. "You will not leave the secure wing without a guard," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of the familiar gravelly undertones I loved. "You will use the service elevator only, and you will stay within the residence level. Effective immediately, your travel is limited to the areas I designate." The words weren't phrased as a question or a plea for my safety. They were orders. "This is not a negotiation, Sophia. Adrian is escalating. He used Ivana to flush you out and distract us. That break-in was real, and it was a warning. I need you safe, which means you need to be predictable." He didn't touch me, but the sheer force of his will, wrapped in that cold, protective logic, felt like physical restraint. I heard the frantic, desperate undertone, "He's scared." But what registered more clearly was the familiar, infuriating language of control. It wasn't a lover's request. It was the contract reasserting its dominance, turning my life into a set of non-negotiable terms. "You signed the contract, Sophia." His gaze was steady, drilling into mine, referencing the thick document that detailed my salary, my living arrangements, and the non-disclosure terms. "You agreed to cooperate with all security and residence guidelines for the duration of this arrangement. This is merely an enforcement of terms you already accepted." It wasn't a threat of eviction or a hint of malice. It was far colder, a simple statement of logic, rooted in paperwork and legality. It cut deeper than any insult Ivana could have thrown. The contract, the thing that had once represented a clean slate, financial freedom, and a safe space to hide, had just been weaponized. It was meant to shield me, but now it was the bars of my cage. Lysander was using the binding nature of the agreement to strip me of my agency, my right to walk, to investigate, to be, all in the name of the protection I had signed away my freedom for. The betrayal felt sharp, not because he was cruel, but because he was ruthlessly, impersonally right. My whole body went rigid. The cold, analytical dread of Adrian's plan was immediately replaced by the familiar, hot rush of resistance against ownership. I took a deliberate step back, putting distance between us, creating space for my own air. "No," I said, the sound not a polite refusal, but a single solid piece of concrete slamming onto the polished floor. Lysander didn't move, but his eyes narrowed. "I won't be confined to certain areas. I won't be trailed by a security detail, and I absolutely will not follow your orders." My chest felt tight, not from fear of Adrian, but from the sudden, suffocating feeling of being owned again. "You don't get to decide what I can do. I am not a business asset to be secured in a vault." It wasn't rebellion. It was the simple, terrifying assertion of identity. I had traded my independence for safety once before when I signed that contract, and the thought of being forced back into that subservient role, just as I discovered my own strength and the true enemy, made my vision sharpen with defiance. I wasn't scared of Adrian's threat, I was scared of Lysander's control. I would not be saved and owned simultaneously. Lysander's jaw flexed, the movement sharp against his dark skin. He didn't raise his voice, but the low register he used was heavy with a dangerous refusal to yield. I am trying to keep you alive, Sophia. This isn't about control, it is about mitigating risk. Adrian is playing for real, and he is playing for keeps. I took another step toward him, ignoring the danger implicit in the tightness around his eyes. Then treat me like a partner, not collateral damage. Tell me what's actually happening. You've been keeping secrets about the break-in, about Adrian's motivations, and now you expect me to sit quietly while you manage my movements? If you want to protect me, you don't lock me up. You stop acting like I'm yours to control. The sound of my own voice echoing off the walls of his massive silent office was startlingly loud. We stood nose to nose now, the air between us charged with desperate frustration and a terrifying, volatile intimacy. My hands clenched at my sides, refusing to reach out, refusing to back down. The expensive, warm air in the office felt thick, compressed by the unspoken truth. The danger outside was terrible, but the battle for my independence, right here, was more terrifying. The fight was interrupted, not by a knock, but by a sudden, forceful thump as the office door was thrown open. A security guard, one of the serious ones, built like a brick wall and usually assigned to the perimeter, stood there, urgently pulling the door shut behind him. He was breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat. "Mr. Lysander, we have a problem." The urgency in the man's voice was like a bucket of ice water thrown over the volatile heat of our argument. Lysander's attention snapped away from me instantly, his body language shifting from controlled CEO to immediate military readiness. "Report." The guard didn't waste time. "Her security profile, it's gone, sir. Completely erased from the residence network. Not a server glitch. It was deliberate." He was talking about my digital access key, the ID that verified I belonged in the house. Adrian hadn't just used Ivana's spite. He was taking calculated, digital steps to systematically isolate me. The immediate external danger had burst the bubble of our personal conflict. The guard didn't just stop at the erasure. He was holding a tablet, swiping quickly until he found the file he needed. Lysander and I both leaned forward, breaking the charged space between us to stare at the screen. The image was a screenshot of a digital security log. The first entry was highlighted. "Access denied. Subject Sophia Rex. Reason, high risk. Unauthorized attempts in archives wing." It was a planted flag, a digital fingerprint intended to frame me. The guard scrolled down. There were fabricated records of multiple failed attempts to override the system, all time-stamped for the early hours of the previous night. The exact time the intruder was actually there. It made me look like the thief Lysander had feared all along, flagged now as an insider threat by the system itself. My mouth went dry, the air catching in my throat. I couldn't look away from the cold, damning white text against the black screen. My pulse hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't about gossip or broken contracts anymore. Someone was actively building a case against me, meticulously manufacturing the evidence to justify my removal. The fear was shocking, physical, and paralyzing in a way Ivana's spite never was. Disbelief was a bitter taste on my tongue. They weren't just trying to shame me, they were trying to eject me. Lysander didn't look at the tablet or the guard. He was already moving, his attention locked on the guard's face, not the data. "You have 5 minutes to scrub that digital flag and reinstall her level 1 clearance," Lysander snapped, his voice a razor blade, sharper and faster than I'd ever heard it. "If I see any evidence of external tampering again, I will have your department shut down entirely. Escort her to the primary living quarters and stay with her. Now." He was trying to manage the situation, trying to erase the evidence and enforce the very protection I just fought against. He reached toward me, intending to step in front of me, to put his body between me and the looming threat represented by the guard's presence. But his movements were late, his control over the narrative already fractured. The damage was done not just by Adrian's digital attack, but by the dawning realization hitting me. Lysander knew this threat was escalating far past the contract. He had been secretly managing this danger, trying to keep it outside the walls of our relationship, and his failure to be honest with me, to trust me with the true scope of the attack, was what had just left me exposed. His fear, shown through his frantic orders, looked exactly like dominance. Before I could fully process the implication of his snapped orders, the raw, possessive fear that fueled his need for control, Lysander turned back, moving with a desperate, fluid speed. His hand shot out, not to touch my face, not to comfort, but to grasp the delicate bone of my forearm. It wasn't a gentle hold. It wasn't violent either. There was no malice, only the shocking heat and crushing force of a man who felt everything slipping out of his grasp. I sucked in a sharp breath, my eyes involuntarily flying to his face. The guard was still there, a silent witness to this raw, physical display. Lysander pulled me in, his face close enough that the sharp, clean scent of his cologne filled my lungs, close enough that I could see the frantic, silver-flecked darkness in his eyes. His voice dropped low, a desperate rasp that barely carried above his own harsh breathing. "You don't understand how close you are to being hurt, Sophia. This is not a game." The sheer, exposed terror in the grip he had on me, the desperation in his words, made me still. His hand was a brand on my skin, desperate and territorial. The man I loved was terrifying me, not with cruelty, but with the boundaryless intensity of his need to save me. We were locked in a dangerous proximity, my arm trapped in his fierce, warm grip, my breath stirring the hair at his temple. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to assert the freedom I craved, but my body was betraying me. I was intensely aware of the pulse beating fiercely under his thumb, matching the frantic rhythm in my own chest. Lysander's fear was a suffocating pressure, reflected in the harsh lines around his mouth and the intensity of his glare. It looked less like worry and more like a furious, territorial anger at something daring to threaten what was his. And my response? It was a dizzying mix. My initial fear of his dominance was quickly being consumed by something far more complex. A fierce, reckless bravery born of desperation, layered over the undeniable ache of wanting him to devour the few inches separating us. I saw the danger, felt the cold reality of Adrian's threat, but what drew me in was the naked vulnerability beneath Lysander's control. We were inches from a kiss, inches from a fight, inches from complete surrender. This was forbidden intimacy, forced by danger, and it was the most potent desire I had ever felt. The silence stretched until my eardrums throbbed. I didn't pull away. I leaned in, just a fraction. My breath hitched, the silent admission of my desire warring with the cold, hard memory of my past. I wanted to believe the desperation in his grip was pure fear for my safety, but the habit of self-preservation, forged in years of being seen as disposable, was stronger. I looked past the raw magnetism of his face, past the protective fury, and focused on the undeniable fact of his behavior. I spoke, the word a near whisper that still echoed in the tense quiet. "Lysander?" He didn't answer. He just held my arm, his eyes searching mine as if trying to calculate the depth of my resistance. "Is this about protection?" I asked, the internal question suddenly given voice. "Or is this about control?" I didn't pull away, letting him feel the tremor that ran through my arm. I was giving him a choice to step outside his old narrative, to offer me the trust that true protection required. The silence hung heavy, broken only by our labored breathing and the knowledge that the armed guard was a witness. Lysander was a man who always had an answer, a plan, a strategy. But facing that choice, the line between love and dominance, he offered only more pressure, his thumb digging slightly into my skin. He had no answer. He just held me. The guard, having witnessed the explosive, silent exchange between us, finally cleared his throat, forcing his attention away from Lysander's frozen fury. He looked straight at me, his face grim, and spoke the final damning line that severed all connection to the quiet life I'd hoped for. "Sir," the guard said, avoiding Lysander's gaze entirely, and looking only at me. The instruction that came through the modified terminal code was specific. It didn't just flag her. It stated that someone wants her removed. Removed. Not humiliated, not shamed, not even exiled from the residence. The word hung in the air, heavy and blunt, carrying the unmistakable scent of permanent erasure. It meant far more than just losing my home or my job. It meant losing everything. I wasn't collateral damage in a corporate takeover anymore. I was the actual target. The external threat had just officially become lethal, and in the sudden sickening drop in my stomach, I knew I could no longer tell if Lysander's embrace was a shield meant to protect me or a cage designed to keep me contained until the threat, whatever it was, passed him by. The word removed was a hook in my gut, pulling me backward, away from Lysander and the sudden, devastating weight of his grasp. I pulled my arm free, not violently, but with a sharp, decisive movement that said, "I do not belong to you." The security guard shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the end of the chain of command. Lysander's mouth opened, perhaps to reassert control with another order, but I was already walking. I didn't run, didn't look back, but I moved fast enough that the air around me felt cold again. I wandered deeper into the labyrinth of the mansion's residential floor. Every sound, the muffled whir of the HVAC, the distant chime of the grandfather clock in the main hall, was suddenly the sound of footsteps, the crackle of a hidden microphone. My heart was still hammering out the rhythm of our fight, not the fear of Adrian. I needed space to unpack the two terrifying truths, that someone wanted me gone, and that Lysander's first, raw instinct was to try and lock me down rather than trust me. The opulent, quiet hallways felt like a gilded tomb, and the need to breathe, to find a place unmarred by his control, was a physical driving need. I was shaken, but beneath the adrenaline, an acidic curiosity about the true depth of the danger was starting to burn. I walked until the carpet changed from the plush silence of the main wing to the thinner, rougher weave of a seldom-used corridor. The lighting here was dimmer, relying on distant sconces rather than the blinding chandeliers near Lysander's office. I was just about to turn back when I saw it. A door, framed in simple dark wood that I'd never registered before. It was tucked between two massive tapestries, blending so perfectly with the mahogany paneling that it was nearly invisible. But it was not closed fully. A hair-width gap of deeper, older darkness showed at the jamb, a black slice of curiosity slicing through the wall. It felt wrong. In a house where every millimeter was polished, monitored, and intentional, a slightly ajar, unannounced door was a siren blare. I paused, my frantic internal rhythm slowing, overtaken by a creeping sense of trespass. I pushed the door inward, and the air that met me was heavy. The dry, comforting smell of aging paper and leather, overlaid with the metallic tang of old security equipment. Inside, rows of floor-to-ceiling shelves held books far older and more academic than the art books in Lysander's primary study. But it wasn't the books that caught me. It was the furniture. A single military-grade steel desk, flanked by several low, 5-drawer filing cabinets painted institutional gray, and tucked against the far wall, a matte black safe. This wasn't a library. This was an archive, a bunker. The atmosphere had shifted entirely, shedding the tense romance of the office for the silent, unnerving weight of genuine suspense. The filing cabinets were not locked. My hands, still trembling slightly from the argument with Lysander, reached for the top handle of the nearest drawer. It slid open on heavy metal rollers with a sound like a quiet gasp. Inside, everything was organized by date, labeled in stark, printed tabs. I pulled out the first folder, Project Chimera Pre-Launch Security Intel. It wasn't financial or corporate law. It was investigative. My eyes scanned the contents, pulling them out piece by chaotic piece. A grainy, unauthorized photo of a man in shadows on a dimly lit street corner. A sheet of brittle, yellowed newspaper clippings, with headlines about a failed acquisition and a sudden resignation. A 2-page printout of an encrypted email thread about a breach of confidence that involved millions. This wasn't the kind of documentation you keep for taxes. This was a war room. Each file was a record of a strategic maneuver, a defensive position, or a wound inflicted. Lysander had enemies, not competitors. He had been fighting a hidden battle inside this fortress for years, and every coded security measure, every restriction he had placed on me, wasn't paranoia. It was defense. My breath stuttered, choked by the realization that his world was infinitely darker than the golden veneer he presented. I slid the folder back, my fingers moving to the next tab. Personnel. Disciplinary disappeared. The title itself sent a cold spear of disbelief through me. Inside were printouts of employee records, but the dates were old, preceding my time here. I skimmed a few names: a corporate CFO, a software engineer, a man listed only as a personal liaison. Under their records, the word terminated was replaced by heavy black marker, and a small official-looking stamp read, "Status, untraceable." A few folders down, a tab was labeled simply AK. I didn't have to guess who that was. Inside, Adrian's name was mentioned in a single early memo dated 3 years prior concerning a hostile acquisition where he had been the main informant who flipped sides last minute. This wasn't a jealous ex fighting over a girl. This was a sustained, calculated campaign, a war Lysander had been waging in the shadows for years. I wasn't intruding into a domestic dispute. I was standing in the middle of a battlefield, and the dizzying truth was that my role was just a small, strategically vulnerable pawn. The air in the archive suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I was intruding into a truth I was never meant to witness. I quickly moved past the disappearance files. My gaze locked on a thick burgundy binder on the shelf above, secured with a small combination lock, the only thing in the room that was actually secured. I grabbed a pen from the desk and pried open a nearby manila envelope, pulling out a thin sliver of plastic I'd found earlier. It took one sickening bend of the plastic, and the small lock snapped. The binder smelled strongly of ozone and burnt paper. The title page was stark, "The Fall of Odysseus, 2019. Inside, the pages detailed a catastrophic legal and financial scandal that nearly vaporized Lysander's entire company 5 years ago. It wasn't just a hostile takeover. It was a character assassination campaign that tied him to a massive offshore fraud, forcing him into a public silence that lasted months. There was a blurry, deeply unsettling photo. Lysander, younger, his face bruised and pale, being escorted through a crowd of reporters. I looked at the man in the photo, then at the steel desk and the locked safe. This was the origin story of the fortress. This was the wound that forced him to wall himself off and build a life predicated on absolute control. The danger wasn't a sudden, jealous attack. It was the slow, methodical execution of an old, devastating plan that Adrian and the untraceable men were clearly a part of. What could have been so dark, so dangerous, that it made him trade his entire public life for this controlled, solitary existence? I was still holding the heavy burgundy binder, tracing the bruise on the younger Lysander's face in the photo, when the dry, metallic scent of the room changed. It became charged, electric. I didn't hear a door open or footsteps approach on the thick Persian runner in the outer hall. I only felt the shift in the air pressure, the instantaneous draining of oxygen as the silence became occupied. I turned slowly, the binder still in my hands. Lysander was standing in the doorway exactly where I had been moments ago. He wasn't yelling, wasn't red-faced, wasn't the cold, controlling CEO. He was simply terrified. His custom suit was rumpled, his hair slightly disheveled, and his eyes, usually silver points of control, were dark, wide wells of primal fear. He didn't look at the files strewn on the desk. His gaze was fastened only on the binder I held, and then on my face. "Sophia?" His voice was a flat, ravaged sound, stripped entirely of authority or tenderness. It was the sound of a man watching his greatest secret, the foundation of his entire controlled existence, crumble. You weren't supposed to see that. Any of it. The conflict was raw. His deep need to protect me was actively betrayed by the truth he had hidden, yet the urge to control the chaos of the room and my reaction was still visibly battling the terror in his eyes. He didn't step forward. He just waited, rigid, like a man bracing for a gunshot. I let the binder drop onto the desk with a heavy thud. It was the sound of my deference ending. My fingers were cold, but my core was on fire with a furious clarity. I moved around the metal desk, placing myself between Lysander and the open files, making him look at me instead of his secrets. "Don't tell me what I was supposed to see," I said, my voice low and solid, completely devoid of the tremor it had held 10 minutes ago. "Tell me the truth." I pointed at the filing cabinet, at the binder, then at the photo of him bruised and terrified. "Who are these people?" "Not Adrian. I saw his name years ago. I mean the others, the men who disappeared." I took a step closer, pushing him for the answers he always withheld. "Why are they after you? Why is a hostile takeover worth assassinating your character? What did you do that created an enemy this obsessive?" The questions were short, sharp, designed to break through the practiced wall of his control. Lysander just watched me, his throat working. He opened his mouth, then closed it, the silence deafening. The answer wasn't that he didn't know. The answer was that he knew, and the knowledge itself was the weapon he refused to give me. Lysander still didn't move or speak, confirming the answer wasn't absence, but intent. The silence stretched until the only sound was the faint hum of the archive's unseen ventilation. That's when the turning point hit me. Not like a gradual understanding, but a physical shock that made my knees lock. This never started because of me. I had walked into this house believing the risk, the secrecy, the control was a direct consequence of my desperation and my contract. I thought I was the anomaly, the loose end that needed securing. I thought I was the one who had accidentally disrupted his perfect, safe life. But Lysander's life wasn't safe. It was a lie built on steel and silence. The chaos of the fall of Odysseus, the disappeared men, Adrian's long-standing betrayal. This war had been burning long before I ever signed the paperwork. I wasn't the catalyst. I was collateral. I stepped into a fire already raging, and Lysander had simply moved me to the most heavily fortified wing, calling it love, when it was purely an act of military defense. The cold analytical dread that had defined my fear of him was suddenly and violently replaced by a fierce, sympathetic terror for him. All this time, I thought I was the disruption, the variable that Lysander was desperately trying to smooth over and contain. I thought my complicated history, my need, was what made me a problem in his carefully constructed life. The shame of being temporary had curled in my chest for months. But standing here, seeing the cold proof of threats and betrayals that predated me by years, the self-loathing curdled into a devastating protectiveness. Lysander wasn't an impenetrable god of industry. He was a man who had been cornered and forced to build a shell to survive. He was the one in danger. My fear for myself, my career, my privacy, my heart, vanished, replaced by a suffocating image of him, alone in this archive, plotting defenses against ghosts and predators. Anyone who came close to him, anyone he cared about, was standing in the blast radius of this ancient war. And I had done more than just come close. I had willingly climbed into the fortress, and now I was realizing the walls weren't meant to keep me out, but to trap the danger in with us both. I lowered my eyes from Lysander's panicked stare to the steel desk, needing to ground myself in the hard reality of the archive. On the corner of the desk, next to a black and white printout of a corporate structure chart, was a yellow sticky note. It hadn't been there when I first opened the drawer, which meant Lysander or his security team had been working here recently. On the note, in bold, fresh red marker, was a single, devastating circle drawn around the name I'd seen earlier, buried in a memo from years ago: Adrian. The red marker was sharp, aggressive, and undeniably recent. This wasn't a closed case file. This wasn't a historical archive of wounds that had healed. The danger was not in the past. It was active, immediate, and specifically targeting the person I thought was just a ghost in our relationship. The man in the doorway, my billionaire, my protector, my secret love, was a soldier in an ongoing war. And in that moment, seeing that fresh red circle, I knew the walls of his fortress weren't enough. This wasn't over. It had already begun. The red circle around Adrian's name was still burning into my vision when the sound hit. It wasn't a chime or a bell. It was a deep, sustained electronic howl that ripped through the mansion's silence, vibrating up through the soles of my shoes and into my chest. The noise was instantly joined by a chaotic, flashing pattern of emergency red lights that strobed through the library, turning Lysander's pale face into a terrifying sequence of crimson shadows. Before either of us could move, a guttural male voice, mechanized and amplified, blared over unseen speakers. System breach detected. Perimeter lockdown initiated. All personnel proceed to designated safe zones. The sound of the command was swallowed immediately by the shouts of guards in the distant halls and the frantic, static crackle of a dozen radio channels suddenly alive. Everything had stopped being about our argument, our contract, or our feelings. It was just fear, pure and deafening. The danger was no longer a secret folder, it was here. Lysander didn't hesitate. The man who had been paralyzed by his secret moments before was instantly replaced by the strategist. He slammed the open filing drawer shut with a deafening clang of steel on steel and then lunged toward me, not with tenderness, but with military speed, grabbing my wrist again. Move, Sophia, now. But the fortress he'd built for control was now turning into a trap. The sound of massive machinery engaging was a grinding noise that overpowered the sirens. The doorway where Lysander stood, the one that led into the outer hall, was suddenly bisected by a half-inch thick sheet of iron. It slid down from the lintel with horrifying speed, stopping 3 feet from the floor, leaving only a dark, squat opening for us to duck through. Outside, the large, arched windows of the archive room began to darken as internal steel shutters sealed over them. The entire house was shrinking, contracting around us. Lysander pushed me toward the gap, but the realization was sickening. The mansion wasn't just protecting us, it was cutting off every escape route. The protection he'd promised had turned instantly into an imprisonment, exactly like his love. We scrambled through the iron gap and into the plush, wide main hallway. But it was no longer plush. It was a storm. Guards in black tactical gear were sprinting toward the north and west wings, their boots muffled but urgent on the carpet. The air thrummed with raw energy. The crackle of their radios was constant, issuing short, sharp orders. Code red. Perimeter breached. Locate primary target. 2 men near the main staircase had weapons drawn, their bodies pressed against the marble wall, aiming toward the floor above. They were not aiming at a fire. They were aiming at a person. The sheer professional speed of the mansion's mobilization was terrifying. This wasn't a drill or a small incident. This was an immediate, prepared-for attack, and the only person who looked calm was Lysander, whose face was now a mask of cold, decisive focus. Lysander pulled his hand free of mine, already pulling his secured phone from his inner jacket pocket and speaking clipped, technical sentences into it. I started to follow him toward a secondary, heavily reinforced door when my own phone vibrated, a foreign, high-pitched alert sound overriding the security system's howl. I fumbled it out of my jeans pocket. The screen was dark, but a single, chilling text message had just come through from an unknown number. My fingers were slick with sweat as I gripped the screen and read the words, cold white against the black glass. You can't protect them all. My eyes snapped up, searching the sprinting guards and the frantic, mobilized security personnel. Adrian wasn't just watching us from afar. He wasn't just outside the perimeter. He was in the system. He was inside the narrative of this attack, making it personal, showing me that he knew exactly where I was and what I was looking at. I tried to call Lysander's name, holding out the phone with Adrian's chilling text, but he was already moving, 2 heavy security guards flanking him, their attention locked on him and his commands. Take him to Alpha 6 now, one guard ordered, grabbing Lysander's arm. Lysander tried to shake free, his focus fracturing between the crisis and me. Sophia, go to the east wing. But before he could finish the instruction, the secondary door, the heavily reinforced one he was reaching for, slid shut with a pneumatic hiss and a final echoing clank. The guard had prioritized the primary target and its safety protocol. Lysander was on one side of the newly sealed steel barrier, yelling a futile command into his radio. I was stranded on the other, watching the heavy door separate us. The sheer, swift exclusion was like a physical punch, confirming the hierarchy I already knew. I was an afterthought in his protocol, an unprotected detail. The fear that had been for him suddenly twisted back into a hot knot of isolation and fury. I stood there, staring at the sealed, sound-dampening metal where Lysander had just been. The sirens were a high, painful screech against the quiet thrum of the emergency systems. I was completely isolated, trapped in the center of a mansion that was actively trying to crush the threat and me along with it. My focus was on the phone in my hand, Adrian's message glowing on the screen like a poisonous promise, when a familiar scent, expensive vanilla and something sharp like alcohol, hit me. Look at you. The voice, low and laced with triumph, scraped along the edges of the chaos. Ivana stepped out of the shadow of a large decorative pillar, her designer dress rumpled, her face pale, and her eyes wide with a manic mix of fear and satisfaction. She wasn't carrying a weapon, but the look she gave me was a blade. She looked just as shaken by the system failure as I was, but she had located a familiar target in the confusion. She moved toward me, her heels clicking fast and erratic on the marble, closing the space that Lysander's guards had just created. She looked like a predator who had finally cornered her prey but her fear was barely concealed. Ivana stopped 3 feet away, close enough for me to smell the vanilla and the bitter fear radiating off her skin. She didn't bother with the greeting. Her chin was up, but her lip was trembling. "This is what you did," she hissed, her voice struggling to be heard above the mechanical drone of the security system. "You brought the rot inside. He kept this place sterile, safe, and now look." She swept her hand toward the sealed iron door that divided the hall. The gesture was meant to be condemning, but it was pathetic, desperate. I looked at her, then down at Adrian's text burning on my screen. The familiar sting of her petty jealousy and blame evaporated, replaced by the fierce, cold clarity I'd found in the archive. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. "Stop acting like you're in control," I told her, my own voice low and steady, forcing her to lean in to hear me over the chaos. "I know you're not the one pulling the strings, Ivana. You're just another variable Lysander didn't account for. Just like me." I lifted the phone and held Adrian's message in her line of sight, the white text stark against the red lights. Her eyes went wide, the color draining from her face as she read the words, and she finally, truly recoiled. Not from me, but from the raw, undeniable proof of a power that eclipsed her own. Ivana's panic finally overwhelmed her rage. She didn't bother looking at me, her gaze darting instead toward the sound of shouts now echoing from down the hall. She grabbed my arm with frantic, desperate fingers, the jewelry on her wrist clanking. "Adrian doesn't care about the money," she spat, her breath ragged. "He cares about the ruin. He knows Lysander's one weakness is control, and he's ripping it apart." She shook my arm, hard. "This whole thing, the panic, the timing, it's not a physical attack." Her eyes, glazed with genuine terror, locked on mine. "He wants you scared. That's the entire point. He wants Lysander paralyzed, trying to protect the one person he actually cares about." The admission, laced with jealousy but delivered with terrifying sincerity, was the final piece of the reversal. Ivana wasn't a threat. She was collateral, exactly like me, and she finally understood it. The mastermind wasn't a woman trying to win back a man. It was Adrian, orchestrating a siege of the mind. The realization was bitter, but it gave me a fierce, protective focus I hadn't known I possessed.